Well, I suppose I'm supposed to talk about this week's Torah portion, but it turns out that this week's Torah portion is a little bit messy. In the vast majority of Reformed congregations throughout the world, we'd be finishing Passover this evening and beginning to read from Acharei Mot, which is, if you're more traditionally minded, is actually next week's Torah portion. It turns out we're not doing that. We're doing a little bit more traditionally, so tomorrow morning we'll be reading an excerpt from Parshat Re'eh for the 8th day of Passover. And we're going to be talking about that tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock at our Torah study, so you can join us. But since we're already talking about that at 9 o'clock tomorrow at our Torah study, I figured maybe I'd just let you guys help me out with a question that came up during our Passover Seder this year. I was sitting at my in-laws' Seder, and we were reading the long list of the plagues upon Egypt. And for some strange reason, on this year, I was actually paying attention. And the names of the plagues were being read out, and as each name was recited, I stopped and I thought to myself, these are actually pretty scary. I mean, sometimes it seems like it's a kid's story almost, but, if the rivers were turning to blood, that's scary. Finding a frog in your kitchen cupboard, maybe not as scary, but still, I could imagine lots of people would be scared of that. Locusts descending from the skies, scary. Not to mention, of course, the ultimate plague, the slaying of the firstborn, which is the scariest of them all. And then, of course, we have 3 days of darkness. I mean, really, that's the big hurt? Like, that's how God clamps down on the Egyptians for abusing God 9 times in a row? 3 days of darkness? Like, you would think, I hate to say this, you would think we could do better, right? Like, it's not real. Is it really that scary? Like, that's the best Adonai has in store? Like, why are we afraid of the dark? That's my question for this way. And I found some stuff, I went and researched, and so I'll hand it out to you guys. We'll take a few opinions, and then we'll see if we could come up with a reasonable answer. I know I didn't print out enough of these, but there are more in the back that are going to come around. So if you're patient, you will find something in your lap that you could take home with you. I want to make sure everybody always gets some sort of present on Shabbat, so these are your presents for tonight. If you could just be nice and pass them around, and if you don't get one within the next, 45 seconds, just go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll make sure that somebody gets one to you. Does that sound all right? Okay, I appreciate that. Let's see here. I only held on to one for all you guys. Sorry about that, but I think we're going to get them around. So for those of you who haven't gotten one yet, I think they're coming around, but again, raise your hand. But we're just going to start with the description of this awful, terrible 3 days of darkness that befall straight from the Torah. It comes from Exodus chapter 10. Moses held out his arm towards the sky. I'm not trying to pretend I'm Moses, so I'm going to put my hand back. And a thick darkness appeared throughout the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one budged. But all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwellings. So we have a few commentators that I'm hoping could help us out, and maybe together we could come to some sort of solution about why we're afraid of the dark. We're going to need some helpers, though. So is there any chance you could read this first commentary for us? Let me pull this down. What? Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, the first commentary.
Oh. Moses held out.
You actually have to hold it near your mouth.
Moses held out his arm towards the sky.
No, this one.
Oh,
This one. The
a thick darkness Darkness is not a substance, but rather the absence of light. That is why light banishes the darkness. However, the darkness in Egypt was a separate entity. It was tangible and could be felt. Thus, no light could banish it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have one particular potential answer to our quandary. I'm sure we're going to come up with more amongst ourselves that might be a little more 21st century than Mr. Sforno. Sforno was a commentator from, I believe, 12th century Italy. But do we have, I'll give you the short one, is that okay?
A thick darkness. The darkness was as thick as a golden dinar.
Yeah, you said it right. A dinar is a form of currency. And this was written sort of, known to our Aramaic ancestors around the time of the writing of the Talmud. This comes from actually an earlier midrash called Exodus Rabbah. As far as we can tell, Exodus Rabbah was a bunch of stories written about the book of Exodus that were published somewhere around the 8th or 9th centuries. And then we've got one more, which is kind of long. Do we have anybody who really likes reading? Oh, okay, we found. I was going to say, we got a bunch of Jews. It's not going to be that hard to find somebody who likes to talk. Oh, that was me, and I'm sorry. I'll give you 20 push-ups later.
Oh, I can do that. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one budged. The greatest darkness occurs when a person fails to see her fellow and fails to participate in the suffering of others. People could not see one another refers to the Egyptians failing to feel the distress of their fellows. Their senses were dulled, so they could not budge. This is what the sages meant when they stated that the darkness was as thick as a golden dinar. The pursuit of wealth or other attainments in the corporeal world may increase one's egocentricism, dull her eyes, and make it difficult for her to feel the distress of fellow Jews.
Sorry? Oh, I just didn't hear it. So we have 3 different opinions from different sages. So I was hoping to get your opinion while we're here. You sort of have all the sources that we have at our disposal on this particular subject. Why are we afraid of the dark? Perfect.
Well, if you look at how primitive people reacted to solar eclipses, they were afraid that light would be gone for good. They could never grow crops. And, their existence would be gone.
Okay, so we have an argument that perhaps we're not afraid of the dark, but just our ancestors are afraid of the dark. Any other ideas? Why are we afraid of the dark? What makes the dark scary?
Well, in this story, it's isolating. It's terribly isolating. Nobody can see even each other, so you're completely alone. And then the other thing is, they didn't know it was only going to last for 3 days. So it's terrifying because it could go on forever.
Ah, okay. I like that. So not only do we not know how long it's going to last, which makes it scary, but it's isolating. We're alone. And I think being alone is pretty scary. I agree with you.
Small children thought there were monsters in the dark.
Sorry?
Small children thought there were monsters in the dark.
You are correct. Do we have any parents here with us tonight? I'm sure we have some parents. Okay, we have a few. How many of your kids had a nightlight in their room? How many kids had a nightlight in the room? Come on, it's okay. It's just us. You can be okay. I remember visiting my niece and nephew when they were very little, and they just couldn't go to bed without that light. They just couldn't do it. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure it out. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure I had a nightlight when I was a kid too. I'm totally sure. But at the same time, I'm just trying to put my finger on it. I couldn't figure out. Maybe it was the monsters. Although I think if I transpose it now, I'm leaning towards your answer, the idea of being alone, because monsters are okay as long as mom and dad are around. But if your mom or your dad or your big sister aren't there, then all of a sudden monsters become scary. Let's take one more. Let's take one more. Wait, I want to make sure I turned you on and not off. There we go.
If God could make darkness for 3 days, who knows what God would do next? It's the fear of what's God going to do next after the darkness. Not only will the darkness end, but what comes after.
Ah, okay. So what might be happening in that darkness or after that darkness? Thank you very kindly. These are all very, very good answers. And I think I'm going to try and sum them up, if I can, see if we can get at something together. But I really think, at least according to this last stage, according to Even Ha'ezel, darkness is apathy. Darkness is a world that's disconnected. Darkness is loneliness. So even though our ancestors may have been, perhaps, as we would like to say, more primitive than ourselves, this sort of darkness might be something we should be afraid of too. Because by blinding us to the anguish of others, darkness can imprison us all, placing us actually literally back in Mitzrayim, in that narrow, constricted place where we can't budge to help somebody else in need because we don't even realize that they might be suffering. And that perhaps is why our sages suggest that every time we celebrate Passover, each of us is obligated to see ourselves as if we went forth from Egypt. With any luck, that realization, that knowledge that we too can suffer, will alert us to the suffering of others, will banish the darkness that keeps us from seeing other people in need. Our Passover story, even the recounting of those plagues, can remind us that empathy is at the very core of what it means to be Jewish. And so no matter what we achieve, no matter what we desire, no matter what we believe, there can be no success, no want, no conviction so strong that it dulls our eyes from the suffering of others and prevents us from acting. So I think I'm scared of the dark anyway. And perhaps that line we usually say at the end of the Seder actually has some bearing. This year we're still slaves. Next year, may we truly be free from all the darkness that blinds us to others in need.